Alright guys, welcome to this set of videos. This set of videos is going to follow along with the notes that come out of your book from Chapter 4, Section 8. And what we're going to do here in this set of notes is we're going to take a look at both graphing and solving quadratic inequalities. So I'll get into a description here of what we're kind of going to be doing in this set of notes. Before I do that though, just real quick, I'll throw the objectives or learning targets at you. The things you should be able to do by the time we get to the end of the notes. You'll need to be able to graph a quadratic inequality in two variables and solve a quadratic inequality in one variable. And I'm sure at this point those objectives don't really make a whole lot of sense. So let me see if I can kind of clear that up for you a little bit. I'm going to do that by first talking about something we've already done, right? First, the difference between a quadratic in two variables and a quadratic in one variable. Now, if I have a quadratic with two variables in it, that means I have an x and a y. So this is a quadratic equation in two variables where I have y equals some quadratic. Well, anytime you're given y equals, they want you to graph. Graph. Now, anytime they give you a quadratic that only has one variable in it, that means you're going to have a quadratic and it's going to be set equal to 0, right? Because 0 is not a variable, it's a constant. And that means x is my only variable. Well, whenever you're given a quadratic and it's set equal to 0, they're always looking for you to solve. And so hopefully what that helps you do is make a little bit more sense of our objectives, right? When you have a quadratic with two variables, right, you're going to be graphing. But instead of it being an equation, we're going to make it an inequality, which I'll show you here in just a second. So that's why two variables is graphing. Anytime it's y equals, they want you to graph. But if it's a quadratic in one variable, right, you won't be graphing. You could if you wanted to, but you won't be graphing. Instead, you'll be solving, because anytime they take a quadratic and set it equal to 0, they want you to factor the quadratic and find the x-intercepts. They want you to solve, and so that's why it says solve quadratic inequality. All you got to do is add the inequalities, and I'll show you that here right now. So what we've got then is we have a quadratic inequality with two variables, right? I'll have y less than the quadratic, y greater than the quadratic, y less than or equal to the quadratic, or y greater than or equal to the quadratic, right? It could be any one of those four things. Well, what they're going to ask you to do, right, because it's two variables, right? Anytime you have two variables, y inequality of a quadratic, they're going to want you to graph, right? Because remember, two variables means graph. So we're going to be graphing these inequalities. But remember, when you graph an inequality, your solution region is the shaded area, right? So you're going to graph it, you're going to choose a test point, you're going to shade the solution region. So it'll be graphing and shading. Graphing and shading. Okay, but what if you're given, right, a quadratic inequality with one variable, right? So now it's not equal to y, it's 0. So I have a quadratic that is less than 0, quadratic that is greater than 0, quadratic less than or equal to 0, or a quadratic greater than or equal to 0. Well, anytime it's an equality of 0, you're going to be solving. Well, when you solve a quadratic, you're finding the solutions. So in this case, when you have a quadratic inequality in one variable, you're going to be solving and finding the interval that represents the possible solutions. Right? Because it's an inequality, there's more than one possible solution, and we'll just write the interval representing all of the possible solutions. Hopefully that clears up a little bit for you what the objectives mean. The first one, you'll be graphing and shading. In the second objective, you're going to be solving, which means finding the interval, all of the possible values of x that satisfy the inequality. And we'll go ahead and start that on the next page of the notes. So, move on over to the next page, and I'll meet you guys there.